Hi, everyone, and welcome to 289-106 Introduction to Game Technologies, Lecture 5, Designing Games, Part 2, where we're picking up where we left off last week. This will be the COVID-19 edition. I will be splitting this up into smaller sized chunks so you guys can watch at your leisure. And I'd like to remind you guys that there is a channel on the Discord server that is dedicated to having a quick discussion about any of the lecture content. So please hop on there and have a chat. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to head straight on into this. So last week, we took a look at some questions. What is play, what is game, and what is really the purpose of games. And we're going to continue to be talking about that today. So last week we also took a look at Johann Huizinga's Homo Ludens, which discussed a little bit about brains and how brains, our huge brains, can create community, and community creates safety, and safety creates play. And that kind of turns into this cool cycle where play helps our brains, and our brains develop more community and makes more safety and makes more play, and it all kind of comes together into some cool stuff. We spoke a little bit about the magic circle, which is the idea of play and games being a place that you step into away from reality, which where special rules apply within that zone. Which leads us to Roger Caillois' Man, Play, and Games. And he kind of listed certain attributes of games and play. Not obligatory, separate, uncertain, unproductive. They have rules, and they're not explicit reality. They are not tied to what we consider to be our everyday life. Cool. We then took a look at Roger Caillois' axis from paideia, which is play, to ludos, which is game, and how certain games might fit along that axis, and also these other sort of axes or tags that you might want to put on top. And again, this is all kind of giving some context in terms of the history of how people have looked at games. The MDA framework extends from Roger Caillois' work and kind of identifies a couple more things. Principally, there was the, let me step back here. MDA stands for Mechanics, Dynamics, and Aesthetics. And we took a look at last week kind of how that works with the Rattata. And this week I want to look a little bit more about aesthetics and what aesthetics mean in terms of game. All to drive towards this idea of how do I get the player to like my game? How do I make an enjoyable game? How do I get people to actually play my game and continue to play my game, which is kind of the idea. Hopefully not in a predatory way, of course. So we're going to take a look at enjoyment as a byproduct of those aesthetics. Again, how do I get the player to like my game? Before we start on this, I would like you, as a responsible game developer yourself, to think about, how do I like games? So how do I go about enjoying games? What are the games that I do like to play, and why do I like to play them? And there's one particular word that I want to call your attention to, and that word is fun. Whenever I ask someone, like, oh, why'd you like that game? And they say, oh, it was fun. I kind of want to shake them a little bit because that is the most unword word you can use when you're talking about game development. Games should all be fun along some sort of spectrum of what fun is. It doesn't really help to define at all why the game itself was fun. It's just a level of enjoyment, which is fine. But we want to actually start to pick apart and unpack what drives that fun. Like, what does that fun mean? What are the elements of fun to look at? So when we talk about fun, I do want you guys to avoid, or when we talk about games, I want you to avoid the use of the word, oh, it was fun. It's much like, if someone asks you, how was your day? And you were like, it was fine. Or how's the book? And it's like, oh, it's interesting. They're just unwords. They're not really words that provide any information. So let's actually figure out what makes fun. And I'm going to propose to you guys that fun is actually a series of emotions. And if you read the MDA, hopefully you did, that article, then you'll see how they sort of contextualize emotions. When we talk about emotions, part of this process is developing an idea about what emotions there are, what emotions are out there, what emotions are, I expect more explicitly, what are in there in terms of our own being. And you might see charts like this that are, they're kind of cool to kind of look at this and see how people might start to break apart different emotions and how they might relate to each other. And please do take a look at that because they're interesting. But I want you to, I'm sorry, that's MDA. I want you guys to think about the list of emotions and sensations that were brought up in the article that we read. Okay, so I'm going to go through them real quick. There's 8 of them. The first one was sensation, and this is just the idea that enjoyment can be driven by games purely based upon sensation. Things look beautiful and they have a cool sound, and I'm just enjoying, just reveling in the aesthetic, the visual and audio aesthetic of this experience. And that's totally a thing. There are games that have a lot of that. The next one is fantasy. So it's the idea of, again, much like Roger Caillois, you're stepping away from reality into a world that's everything is new and interesting, and we're allowed to play and assume roles and kind of step away from our day-to-day reality. Number 3 would be narrative. So game is drama, game is story. Game is something that has plot points, and this is something we're going to take a look at a little bit later on because I want to talk to you guys a little bit more about how diegetic and non-diegetic narrative works, and meta narrative. So narrative is a really important part of game development, and I think it's cool that it's there. Game is challenge, which is the idea that you can beat a game. That a game will challenge you, your mental capacity, your physical capacity, whatever it is, a game will challenge you. Next up, games is fellowship. I'm sure you guys, most of you guys, hopefully have developed some sort of ability to be social with a game. Whether that's trash talking in Call of Duty. I don't know how many of you guys now are playing Animal Crossing because you're in social isolation and that game is awesome. There's a huge social capacity to that as well. So games definitely allow for a social connection with other real people. And I'm sure as we go on, a social connection with bots and AI and things like that. I know when I first played Portal, the cube, I developed an emotional reaction to my social connection to the cube. Games is discovery, so being able to discover things about this thing that you're working with, and that could or playing with, and that could be discovering new parts of the world, like going to the far corners of the Skyrim world, but it could also be discovering how new mechanics can fit together, and discovering different how different power-ups might work, discovering new strategies to defeat different types of opponents. Whatever it is, it's that idea of discovery is really important in games. Number 7, so expression. Games is self-discovery. So there are certain games that challenge users to start thinking about themselves and who they are. And there are games that allow expression, even in the sort of the basic idea of designing your own avatar that you might see everywhere, from your Wii, your Nintendo Wii, all the way to your Mass Effect character, your Skyrim character, where you're actually defining this character and you're sort of expressing yourself and you're expressing who you want your character to be through the visual qualities of the character itself. So games have a lot of self-expression. And lastly, games as submission, which is kind of a weird word for them to use, but they're using it, so we're gonna explain a little bit. So submission isn't necessarily bowing down to the game and worshiping the game. Not that kind of submission. It's this idea of basically spending time with something. You might define it as pastime. You might define it as wasting time or occupying your 25 minutes on the way to work. But it's this idea of submitting yourself to the process of game. And that could be anywhere from playing Bejeweled or Solitaire on your desktop computer. It just takes up time, and some people definitely play games for that reason. So Those are the 8 things presented in the MDA framework, the 8 sensations presented from the MDA framework. Now, if you think about your own experiences with games, you can start to kind of chart how certain games fulfill or hit these 8 different sensations. And you might end up with kind of an internal chart that looks like this. This is called a radar chart. And it basically kind of plots out how far along each of these emotions or sensations a particular game might take. And this is me just kind of throwing games down and kind of responding at a very sort of basic level. It's going to be entirely subjective. Like, you will have a different emotional response to different games. But the important thing is to start, thinking about identifying how certain games work for you and how they might chart out for an example like this. So have a look. This is just kind of the idea again. And the further out, the further away from the center, the more it has of that particular thing. Okay, so with this, I find that these radar charts are pretty useful because ultimately a particular game is going to hit all of these elements to a certain degree, but it's kind of a limited area that a game can play with. So the more that it hits expression and discovery, the more it kind of jams down that corner, maybe the less challenge it'll have, or the less narrative it has. So it kind of pulls away from the other side, or it pulls away from adjacent elements. But the internal area of that zone kind of stays the same, and it's a similar idea of you have 3 things, but you can only have 2 of them. And like a good example of this is in design firms or contract firms, where you present to the clients this idea that there are 3 elements to any given project, and the client can effectively choose 2 and not the third. And those 3 elements are good, cheap, and fast. So what they're saying is, well, we can do your project, and when we do your project, we will hit 2 of these, but you can't have the third, and you have to choose which one you want. So it might be the case that they want it now, and they want it cheap, in which case chances are strong that it's not going to be any good. It's just going to be trash that they throw, but it'll be fast and will be cheap. Conversely, they may want it good and they might want it fast, in which case they'll throw a ton of people at it, and it's not going to be cheap. It's going to be really expensive because they're going to put a lot of people on this project. So again, it's this idea where you might really want to drive sensation and discovery, but that's going to, we only have a limited time and a limited ability to do this work, and that's going to pull away from those other axes. So to sum up this one particular chunk, think of games as mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics from the MDA framework, but you can also think of games as a series of emotional rewards. So you might start to think from your game, these are the type of sensations and emotions that I want to get from this game, and then work your way backwards through MDA, talking about, okay, so if I want to have this emotional response, what kind of aesthetics will we need to have? What kind of mechanics can I use to drive the dynamics to get those aesthetics, and kind of work around your way game design through that. Now, there are other sort of auxiliary developments from the MDA framework that add other things. They add different emotions and different other elements that I'm going to pull out, and we're going to talk about that in a separate recording. But again, think of games as a series of emotional rewards. And you can do that when you are playing a game yourself. You can stop and step away from yourself a little bit and realize, oh my gosh, I just had a really cool moment of discovery, or I just had a really cool moment of social connection through this game, and start to identify those emotions. Okay, so we are also going to talk about narrative in games, but that's going to be further on. I'm going to probably get to that more towards the end of the week. Let me know if this format works for you. Hopefully it does. I think I'm going to hit about 15 minutes, which is cool. Again, Discord, hop on there if you like, if you've got Discord going. There's a general channel for you guys to just chat and hang out. There's a lecture channel where you can talk about the content of these lectures, and there's a questions channel where you guys can help each other out with technical problems. Luke will be on there helping out, and I'll jump on as much as I can. So please take a look. I will be updating the stream site as well with more information. In terms of your assignment this week, don't stress out about it. Don't worry about deadlines. We'll figure out how playtest is going to work. I'm going to be putting together some tutorials about how to build stuff. We'll get some more technical support out for you. So again, please get in touch, support each other, help each other out. This is a super weird time, but let's pull together and let's make some cool games. Thank you very much, guys.